Okay, so today we're going to be talking about microeconomics as opposed to macroeconomics. Now, what are microeconomics and what are macroeconomics? Now, so for this, we're just going to define those terms rather quickly so we can get straight to the good stuff. Now, microeconomics is a branch of economics that deals with the behavior of individual economic activities as with consumers, firms, workers, investors, as well as markets in general. So microeconomics is a bit more specific and down to the core, whereas macroeconomics deals with unemployment, inflation, all these large areas of economic activity. So for macroeconomics, a central theme that keeps popping up would be the idea of limits. So these are just limiting factors to certain people. Like for consumers, let's put this over here. Consumers. Consumers have limits as well. But the main concern of limits is this idea that since we have limits, we can best optimize our limit by finding our best choice of allocation of resources. So what that means is we find our best choice with what we have to use, and otherwise we would just be rather dumb and would not even care. But the main thing is to optimize this, and we do it through trade-offs. For your consumer, certain things trade off, and you have to recognize these trade-offs to know how to best allocate your scarce resources or your scarce abilities. So for consumers, their limited factor would be incomes. Incomes. Now, the consumer theory will describe this in more depth and how they maximize their trade-offs. But then we have our workers. Now, we basically probably know by now what can limit a worker. There are three main factors. The first factor would probably be whether or not they should enter the workforce. Whether and when to enter the workforce. Number two would be this limits them whether and when they should choose to enter the workforce, like what age, basically, or what time period in their life, and should they actually enter the workforce? Well, that's a good question. Now, but number two, the trade-offs in choice of employment. If they want to be employed or not, because maybe they want to get a further education, so they may not work. Employment. And three would be workers have to decide how many hours that they're going to work that particular day. So hours, like maybe they work 3 hours, maybe they work 8 hours. These are all trade-offs that they have to decide on their own and how to make the best of these trade-offs. So then we have, I talked about consumers and then workers, but I said, as in microeconomics, that firms are also a part of this. So I'm going to write firms down here. Firms. Now firms have limits too. They have the limits on what type of product. Type of product. And then they have the resources available. Resources. And then we get the theory of the firm, which will describe how to best maximize our trade-offs. Now, prices can be a trade-off too. Now, microeconomics would describe how the prices are determined and the best way to work with them in the firm, and that's basically the theory of the firm again. And we have what a market is. So, a market. What's a market? A market is basically a collection of buyers and sellers that determine the price of a good. So we have our buyers and sellers together. Sellers. And we have the central theme of markets and theory of markets. Now that's the third theme. And then from here, what I can do is I go to the main beef of what we have to learn. It's gonna be, we have like positive questions. Now you might guess what this is. Positive questions. Positive questions. Now, positive questions, they're the explanations and predictions. That's what they are in microeconomics. So, statements, they're the explanation, and prediction. And then we have positive analysis, analysis. Now, that's basically the analysis of these questions that we have. So what that means is it's a statement that determines the relationships of cause and effect with a positive question. So we're doing cause plus effect, basically, to answer these positive questions. And then we have our nominatives. And we have the nominative questions. They're what ought to be, what should this be, basically. And then we have the analysis, examining questions of what ought to be. So basically, they're just explaining. So, what ought to be. And then we have this decides, both of these decide the design of a particular policy choice and the supplemented value and judgments of whatever it chooses. And you can, it would be like weighing equity against economic efficiency. You want the economic efficiency. So buyers are the consumers, the services, the firms. The sellers are these firms. Also, they're the workers. That's what it is in microeconomics. And the market, as we said before, is the collection of these buyers and sellers that, through actual potential, they may determine the price of a product or many products. And then we have industry. And industry is basically a collection of firms, and they have the same or related price. So basically the supply of the market. And basically from there we would move on to real versus nominal prices. Real prices. Now we're gonna start with the price, the nominal price. It's the absolute price of a good, unadjusted by inflation. So that's just the absolute price. Nothing's affecting it. And it's like the nominal price of a pound of butter in supermarkets. It's not affected. Then we get real prices, which you would kind of assume is somewhat almost the opposite. But real price is the price of a good that's related to the aggregate measured of prices, the price adjusted by inflation, basically. But then we get our methods of changing this and our methods of measuring this. So basically, for this real price, we have to write down that it's adjusted by inflation. This is affected by inflation. And then we get our consumer price index, or we can call it the CPI. Then we got our producer price index, and that measures for the aggregate price level, basically the change price level by this inflation and wholesale goods. That's basically all we need to know about the PPI. And then we have products or services are normally bought by consumers and used by the CPI. So the CPI is more used than the PPI. And then even then, normally bought by business, like items normally bought by business, are used by the CPI as well. So generally, what they will use is a CPI more than the PPI. And this is basically just the ending of the video to microeconomics. So if you have any questions, just ask.